This is The Causes of Things, and I'm your host, Michael O'Fallon. This podcast is intended for one person, a person to whom I owe a great debt of gratitude and someone that has proven himself time and time again to make the right decisions over the past 4 years. Mr. President, I heard you say that you were in the middle of making some of the most important decisions in your life. And I can assure you, it may be the most important decision for the entire world and for folks like me, my wife, and my organization. We are on our knees, praying for you and for this nation. I can't tell you how grateful I am that you are President of the United States of America. I am especially grateful that you are our President today, in the midst of this reflexive crisis that's had its genesis in China and that has not only gripped the United States, but the entire known world. Mr. President, I took tremendous heat from my clients with organizations in Christianity and business when I gave a full-throated endorsement of you in 2016. I knew that of all the candidates, you were the one that would not do what the lobbyists and special interests would try to convince you to do. That is, sell out America and our way of life. I knew you were an economic pragmatist. But Mr. President, I don't want to get ahead of myself. I do want to bring honor where honor is due. And that is to you, Mr. President. Mr. President, you knew that America was the world's last great hope against world Keynesian socialism and the supranational totalitarian state that Hillary Clinton would certainly usher in. Mr. President, may I say that so many of us in the United States admire your grit, determination, and to put it mildly, your fight against those that have attempted to mischaracterize you, your presidency, and your ability to fight back against constant, non-stop attacks from not just the Democrats, but progressive Republicans as well, that were well in line with the political establishment for degrading this nation over the past 40 years. Mr. President, you see, to them you were a threat to their plans of degrading America. Mr. President, you took hit after hit, false fallacy after false accusation, phony witch hunt after phony witch hunt, and constant non-stop reflexive panic crisis points from the mainstream media. And you stood up to them. Mr. President, not a day went by when there wasn't another reflexive scam centered around fertile fallacies to try to demean you, diminish you, and stop you from doing your job. None of that was true. And those of us that love America and love objective truth, we all know that. And Mr. President, nearly every time a tool was used to try to destroy you, it was a tool of falsehood, of lies. It was alchemy. Now, when I use the word alchemy, it is quite a bit different than chemistry or science. Science is finding objective knowledge. Alchemy is not interested in finding objective knowledge. Mr. President, alchemy is interested in hocus pocus, in magic tricks, and being able to fool the audience of something that you know is not true. Maybe you heard a lot about alchemy in the financial sector. As a matter of fact, Mr. President, someone you know from the past who hates you and everything you stand for, he wrote a book in 1992 called The Alchemy of Finance. His name, of course, was Mr. George Soros. Here is a quote from Mr. Soros in his book, The Alchemy of Finance, that should be brought to your attention immediately. And I quote, "The scientific method seeks to understand things as they are, while alchemy seeks to bring about a desired state of affairs. To put it another way, the primary objective of science is truth. That of alchemy, operational success. Let me read that last line one more time. To put it another way, the primary objective of science is truth. That of alchemy, operational success. End quote. In other words, Mr. President, Mr. Soros is interested in spreading subjectivism throughout the world beyond speculation and investments. He wants to get into politics as well and mold and shape the world nearer to his heart's desire. Mr. President, Mr. Soros considers objective truth to be the enemy. Instead, he believes in alchemy, and along with it, operational success. And believe me, Mr. Soros has many, many good pupils that have learned to embrace the measured operational success of alchemy. And it's through alchemy and its handmaidens, the fertile fallacy and reflexivity, that they would attempt to take you down time and time again. And always behind the alchemy, the fertile fallacy, was something else that they were trying to accomplish. Mr. President, do you think for 1 minute that Adam Schiff and Chuck Schumer were ever concerned about a phone call to the Ukraine or the alchemy and lack of truth that came from the fertile fallacy known as the Steele dossier? Mr. President, do you think for 1 moment that any of them were ever concerned about protecting the nation from Russia? Mr. President, they were only concerned about the operational success that comes from applying alchemy. They were never concerned about the truth. They were always concerned about their own operational success. The FISA warrants, falsely obtained through an unconstitutional system, all by using deception and lies to unseat the President of the United States, Donald Trump. And some Republicans were in on this as well. Even after you were elected, some of your former cabinet members and staff leaked information to help the other side, to try to help the mass media, to try to create reflexivity, alchemy for operational success. I can't imagine what that feels like, personally. But on the other hand, I can. Because it wasn't just you they were attacking. They were attacking every liberty-loving citizen in the United States, and well as our founding documents. They would give their life for you, Mr. President. And they were attacking us. We will come back to this a bit later. But Mr. President, I knew you would correct the trade imbalances and the rape of our nation by the mercantilist, totalitarian nation of China. You would try to create common sense. You would work hard to establish U.S. interests first and reject the insane, money-sucking treaties like the Paris Climate Accord. Mr. President, I knew that you would lift the shackles off of small businesses like mine and others and allow us to prosper again. On a side note, Mr. President, right now we're in shackles like we never have been before. But, Mr. President, I knew that you would obliterate the burdensome, money-sucking regulations placed on businesses everywhere that hurt our ability to succeed. Mr. President, I knew you were a builder, a creator, a man who did not like excuses. Going back a few years, in my convention and event business, I had several large groups at the Marriott Doral Resort in Miami. And believe me, as I think you know, it needed some work and attention before you took over operations. You completely transformed the resort, ahead of schedule and below budget. Mr. President, your ability to succeed through hardships set you up for success in this situation. Mr. President, you are the man for this hour. Mr. President, that's why I decided to start Sovereign Nations in 2017. You know, I lost a lot of clients when I started Sovereign Nations. But I knew that with you, we had a chance to set the world back in order. And Mr. President, I knew what was behind the attacks and the push towards global totalitarianism. I knew the folks who were attacking you. You see, some of those folks were my clients at one time, and I knew what they were up to. I still know what they're up to. Mr. President, when you were running your hotel properties, golf courses, and other businesses, I'm sure you were interested in the bottom line on your P&Ls. And when a bottom line didn't look right, you wanted to know exactly what was wrong. Mr. President, you didn't want excuses or theories or subjective information. You wanted to know exactly why hotel ADRs were down, why the revenue yield was off, and why future bookings were down. And you wanted to know immediately so you could correct the situation. But you wanted facts. You wanted objective truth, facts from math and hard numbers, provable numbers. Mr. President, you didn't want magic tricks and hocus pocus or alchemy or some strange new theory that someone had. And maybe some of those had ulterior motives. You didn't want alchemy. You wanted objective truth. You wanted to base your business decisions on objective fact, not subjective numbers with ulterior motives. You wanted facts when writing the economy of the United States as well. Mr. President, you wanted facts when dealing with foreign policy. And sometimes those facts have been hard to come by from your former cabinet members. You see, some of those former cabinet members, although they smiled and gave you honor to your face, some of them were still pushing the same old agendas from the Bush, Clinton, and Obama years. The agendas that would deconstruct America and use the citizens of the United States as batteries to power the rest of the world. Mr. President, some of those cabinet members and federal holdovers had ulterior motives. Those duplicitous cabinet members would say that they were hard at work on the border and the problem of unvetted, unchecked mass immigration, but they would slow walk all of your requests at the State Department, at Homeland Security, and in other areas. You know this. Because, Mr. President, they had ulterior motives. They were trying to protect the system from you and from the American people. They wanted to present alchemy to you, to have you make bad decisions based on false information. Mr. President, the facts are you have presided over the greatest economic growth in this nation since our founding. The explosion in the Dow was greater than the entirety of the range of the Dow Industrials during the Bush years. Your plans work, but your plans are dangerous to those that want to deconstruct and weaken America. Mr. President, and I'm sure you've thought about this many, many times, but this has been a non-stop reflexive circus from the time that you won the election in 2016 until now. Mr. President, all the citizens of this great nation knew that as soon as another scandal passed that the media tried to create, they would be shown to be nonsense, ridiculous, without any real foundation in objective truth, that we would get about a week of rest before the next scandal would hit the press, the blog sites, and the TV. And every time there would be another federal holdover who worked in the West Wing or that had been in their position for 20 years that would go along with some fertile fallacy, the next scandal, to try to destroy you. You know, it almost seemed like there was a rhythm to it. Give it a week and the next reflexive feedback loop against the President of the United States would then start to try to trap you in some sort of corner. It was as if everything that the Democrats and progressive Republicans did was on some sort of strategic schedule. If the president reacts to our accusations or new crisis according to Plan A, then we will institute Plan B. If the president reacts in such a way according to what we just introduced to Plan C, then we implement Plan D. The folks that would deconstruct this nation and rip your presidency apart have their act together. We must admit that. Their plan for operational success. It's what they do. Why would we ever think that it would be any different this time? Mr. President, why would we ever think that those who have met and planned for years for the gradualistic degrading of this nation into a supranational, non-constitutional, global, top-down, elite-ruled technocracy would have stopped to take a break during the coronavirus crisis? We know that they have been game strategizing this for years. That evidence is not hard to find. They know exactly what they want to do next, and it's not about defeating the virus. Mr. President, why wouldn't we think that they wouldn't do anything they could to create a national and global pivot from our way of life and our safeguards against tyranny into their planned oligarchical Keynesian system that they've been proposing for decades? Mr. President, should we not ensure that the idea of America flourishes in this current push towards totalitarian top-down government? Mr. President, we must preserve the idea of America, not just from the power-crazed Democrat governors and mayors, but also from those in our medical leadership, the experts. Mr. President, I'm sure you have done this already, but just in case, has anyone taken the time to really dig into the political worldview and long-term strategic goals of Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, and even Surgeon General Adams and others? What kind of world do each one of them envision for the future? In fact, what do they want to see of the United States of America in the future? Is it even a United States? Mr. President, these are incredibly important questions. Because, Mr. President, these people who are involved in giving directions for national policy that has in so many cases overridden that rock-solid standard by which all of us who are the men and women that make up America, known as the firm, solid ground that we can stand on, our rights, our liberty. Mr. President, these are guaranteed to us in the Declaration, the Constitution, and our Bill of Rights. Mr. President, there has never been a time in our nation's history where our national Constitution has been disregarded to the degree that it has been over this past month. In fact, we are setting a very, very dangerous, disastrous precedent. A precedent that, if accepted as a proper course to apply to this entire nation again in the future, could lead to absolute disaster, even worse than what we are experiencing right now. Mr. President, what if another administration decided to use the false claim that the climate is killing its citizens and the planet, and then decided to shut down the entire nation to, quote, save the planet, end quote, and, quote, save humanity from extinction, end quote? Believe me, this is coming. Mr. President, What if a future administration were to create a website of the United States that would have a second-by-second ticker showing every single car accident and every single road fatality across the United States? Let's say that they had push notifications to every phone every time someone who was in a car accident died. They made sure that every other commercial on TV, no matter what the channel, was about death by car accident, and whose end solution was to end personal autonomy and individual volitional free drivers in their cars. That their only solution to this crisis was to have every person in the United States in the state-created smart car on a 5G-supported grid to be transported from place to place safely. And where social media titans conspired to shut down any suggestions on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube, that this entire reflexive fiasco was to rip the ability for men and women to have freedom of movement wherever they want to go throughout the nation. Mr. President, this isn't a theory. The plans for this have been coming. It's coming very soon. And Mr. President, what if I told you that coming very soon will be a mass media push from all the client scientists to declare that the best thing that ever happened to the planet in the last 2,000 years was the virus? Yes, the virus, because we now have clean air and clean water, and the Earth's lungs are not infected with the virus of human transportation and travel and mass production of goods. Mr. President, this is literally just weeks away. You see, we just created a mountain of non-correlated fallacious evidence for Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her scripted squad of deconstructionists to impale the United States of America upon the funeral pyre of progressive socialism, the Green New Deal. This is coming soon. Believe me, they have their ducks in a row. We just react. Mr. President, I know you are once again running for the office of president, and I support you. But Mr. President, I have to ask, president of what? Will there be a United States of America that is defined by our founding documents by this November? Mr. President, if we do not view all of our solutions through the lens of the Constitution, which is the center and foundation of our laws and personal liberty, which safeguards the American people from tyranny, then the coronavirus will be the least of our concerns. Mr. President, I can clearly and definitely predict what will happen if we continue down our current path. You see, things will fall apart because the center cannot hold, and mere anarchy will be loosed upon the world. The best will lack all conviction, while the worst will be full of passionate intensity. Mr. President, what provides the people of the United States the greatest fire to be great entrepreneurs, great small businesses, great innovators is this: personal responsibility. Mr. President, and I know this is important to you, but the Constitution protects the citizens of the United States from the government. Mr. President, you have been the greatest hero for Americans against overregulation. I beg of you, please do not let the scientists and technocrats destroy the brilliant and long-lasting foundations of America with their calls for safety. Let the American people determine that course of action in accordance with the Constitution. The American people do not need a nanny state. We don't need another mommy. We are men and women filled with courage and determination. Mr. President, we are the sons and daughters of pioneers who left the safe ground of the East and expanded to the West, facing danger and peril every day. I know for my part, my abuela and abuelo left Cuba and thankfully escaped communism. My wife's parents left communist China and escaped to the United States. But Mr. President, if we go back 150 years ago to those great pioneers that left the safety of the East to head to the West, the unknown, the unsettled, they were facing the possibility of famine, disease, and infection, facing the possibility of being killed by wild animals, facing the possibility of deadly weather without shelter. And they knew these risks. And yet, they left safety for opportunity. Because the promise and hope of a chance to live their lives and create success for themselves and for their families meant more to them than safety. America is built on that spirit. The spirit of those who face danger every day. The moment that we step into our cars and begin our drive to work, we face the ever-present possibility of peril, danger, and death. It isn't just a theoretical threat. The danger is real, even if we take every precaution. Mr. President, in 2017, for instance, I was hit by a drunk driver. That accident changed my life forever. But I still value freedom, personal responsibility, and liberty more than a guarantee of safety. I could get that if I just sheltered in my home and didn't go anywhere. Now, there are some, of course, that would say that it would be better to stay at home. Or even worse, to develop a system of safe, smart cars, as we talked about before, that will take you to your destination. What then? And lose my liberty? Lose the freedom that every man, woman, and child inertly longs for, not just here in this nation, but all over the world. For guaranteed safety? Mr. President, I prefer a dangerous liberty over a peaceful slavery. And Mr. President, I am a man with risk categories. Mr. President, could you imagine for just a moment that you or Dr. Bricks or Dr. Fauci would ever make an order to shut down the entire United States military to shelter in place from the disease? What would be the result of that? The result would be that America would be immediately attacked by our enemies and the United States would be on its knees. Why would this be any different if the economic engine that funds the military would be brought to its knees? Our enemies would do exactly the same thing, except they would attack our economic infrastructure and bring us to our knees. And Mr. President, that is what has happened. And don't think for 1 second that there hasn't been strategy after strategy, plan after plan in place of how to bring America to its knees, to usher in a completely new system. But the American people have great courage, great belief in the solid foundation by which this nation is founded. And while we are cautious, we must also be brave. Mr. President, some have asked me, aren't you afraid? I fear neither pain nor death. I know it's always a possibility, so I prepare daily and make wise choices based upon my personal situation. But, Mr. President, there is one thing I do fear: a cage. To have to stay behind bars, whether digital or real, until use and old age accept them and all chance of valor has gone beyond recall or desire. Mr. President, I know that I'm not the only one in this nation that thinks and feels exactly this way. I will not surrender my liberty. Mr. President, if I were to surrender my liberty, it would be a careless, thoughtless insult to my ancestors who died to ensure that I would have that liberty in the future. Mr. President, imagine that in this current crisis, if the primary concerns were the production of ventilators, the development of treatments, and the provision to every man, woman, and child in the United States of hand sanitizer, masks, and gloves. Mr. President, imagine if instead of error-filled graphs, fallacious charts, and data that has never been properly verified, and then was accompanied with terrible instructions to not wear masks from the World Health Organization, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, and Dr. Adams. And believe me, this likely would have resulted in the saving of thousands of lives. That never had any provable foundational data, none of this was replaced by, number one, strong orders from the commander-in-chief to wear your masks everywhere. Number two, to wash your hands thoroughly every single time you come in contact with anything. To never touch your face. To use sanitizer after touching anything. To screen every passenger coming in from international and national flights. And as well, to make sure that those that are sick don't come to church or to school. And as soon as they are sick, to remove them from the rest of the groups of people in their congregations or in their schoolhouse. These are common sense things. And it would have helped us to keep the engine of our nation going. Mr. President, imagine if the main thrust of every briefing was that you were going to be the commander-in-chief of every American and lead by giving instruction to the citizen army to be responsible. Love your neighbor. Stop the spread. Stay in your lane. Follow your exact guidance. What would have been the result? And I know that this is hindsight, but we may never know. But we would not lose America. We would not lose the last great hope for the world. A world that is primed to be divided up to those who want to shove the fourth industrial revolution down all of our throats. Mr. President, here's what I am suggesting is the best move, even better than phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Give the American people the responsibility of safeguarding their nation. Let the American people be the pioneers. Mr. President, I beg of you, please don't hand this nation over to the experts, whose desire is to flatten out the curve of our great economic superpower. Those who would flatten the curve of all that we've accomplished and all the great leverage that the United States has over the rest of the merchants of tyranny in Asia and in Europe. Mr. President, they have flattened the curve, all right. They have flattened the curve of all the growth that happened during your presidency, and even worse, have flattened the hope and strength of America and traded it for safety. And I will resist everything that is in me to live in their digital cage. And you know what, Mr. President? I believe you will do the same as well. You know why? One reason is because you love what America is and what it can be, our way of life. But secondly, Mr. President, it's because it's in your blood. Because both Frederick Trump and Elizabeth Christ Trump, who immigrated from Karlstadt in Bavaria, which is just around the corner, by the way, from where Martin Luther made his famous declaration of, "Here I stand, I can do no other, so help me God." They were pioneers. They sought liberty and opportunity. I know that Frederick Trump valued the liberty that allowed him to prosper in the United States, and I doubt he would have traded his family's future for safety, even during the Spanish flu outbreak in 1918. which sadly ended his life. His spirit and vigor is what infected your father. Your future would be built upon his courageous shoulders. It burned bright, that courage, possibly even brighter, in Elizabeth's soul. You know she was a genius, a brilliant tactician, businesswoman, and strategist. But, Mr. President, let's not forget about your mom, Marianne MacLeod Trump, a Scot from a people who value liberty. Not just liberty, but there's something else that burns in the blood of Scots. That something, as first noted by Scottish author John Galt, call this something Burr and Smedham. Burr means forward momentum or driving force, and Smedham means energy, spirit, and determination. Mr. President, that is what you are made of. It's in your blood. It's in your heritage. And Mr. President, I ask you, I implore you, to train up America on Burr and Smedham. And maybe, just maybe, we can finally have an answer to the question, who is John Galt? It's like in the old stories, Mr. President, the ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger, they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end because how could the end of this story be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad, when so much damage has happened? But in the end, if we are determined to recover our way of life instead of the designed existence of scientists, then this darkness is only a passing thing that we must demand never returns again. Then even this great darkness will pass. If the Constitution is our lens, just as in the stories of old, a new day will come, and when the sun shines, it will shine out the clearer. Remember those old stories that we heard when we were kids? Those were the stories that stayed with you, that meant something, that guided your decisions, even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. President, I do understand. I know why. Folks in those long ago stories had lots of chances of turning back and hiding. Only they didn't. Because they were holding on to something, that there's some good in this world, Mr. President, that's worth fighting for. I implore you, Mr. President, trust the American people, and we will do the right kind of fighting with our freedom to defend our nation, to defend our way of life. We do not need governors and mayors and cabinet members to protect us. We don't need top-down authoritative control. And we will preserve at least one beacon of light in the world that calls out, that says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those principles, Mr. President, are how we defeat this virus and all the ideological viruses that are destroying Western civilization and all of humanity across the globe. And if we are successful, then we can truly make America America again. I'm Michael O'Fallon, and this has been The Causes of Things.